Our next speaker is Dr. Braden Molhoek, and he is going to talk about the intersection of Christianity and genetics. And so please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to share some thoughts. So today I'd like to talk about some of the underlying assumptions that people make regarding their views of human enhancement. There's a tendency for many, but not all, who reject human genetic modification to appeal to human nature or DNA itself, arguing that altering human DNA, particularly in ways which are passed on to future generations, such as through germline modification, is playing God, moving beyond the boundaries of what humans should do. Proponents, on the other hand, are more likely to have an evolutionary understanding of human nature and do not see anything particularly special or sacred about DNA. A common argument is that no one is being forced to undergo any augmentation or enhancement. If someone chooses to do so, shouldn't they have the right to, especially since it is their body or person being affected, not anyone else's. This is an argument based on freedom, in particular a negative definition of freedom. I should be free to do X as long as it does not harm anyone else. In the principle-based approach to bioethics, Beauchamp and Childress discuss the principle of nonmaleficence, that one ought not to harm others. This principle is not considered very stringent, that is, strict or exacting, because it does not take much effort to avoid harming a number of people at once. Perhaps my sitting down now and in my talk would be the best way to not harm the room, but you're stuck with me for another couple of minutes. On the other hand, bioethicists also speak of the principle of beneficence, which is not just avoiding harm, but actively helping someone. Beauchamp and Childress argue that this principle is much more stringent because it requires more of a moral agent. I can avoid harming a number of people at once by not saying hurtful things, but to actively help somebody takes time, effort, energy, and resources. So while I can physically avoid harming everybody in this room throughout the day, I unfortunately cannot pay your registration fees. This means there is a limit to how often you must act beneficently. Most scholars, including Beauchamp and Childress, argue that people are more likely to actively help those with whom they are close or have affection for, say friends or family. While there are circumstances in which one would be obligated to help a stranger, many believe that because of the resources it takes, it's mostly focused on those that you care about. So a clear example of this would be children. Parents often sacrifice a lot for their children, but philosopher and ethicist Julian Savulescu asks whether or not we need to do more. And so he posits the question of whether or not there is a principle of procreative beneficence. The principle of procreative beneficence would be stated in a way such as parents have the obligation to bring about the best possible offspring, to bring to term the embryos with the greatest potential for a good life. Savulescu answers this question in the positive, that yes, the principle does exist. However, so far at least, he has limited the discussion of this to that of assisted reproduction, particularly with the use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. In other words, couples utilize in vitro fertilization, have multiple embryos tested, and implant the ones that are the healthiest or would give rise to the best possible life for a child. There are, of course, issues that can be raised to such a position like this. A non-exhaustive list of some of these issues could be, how does one define what is the best life? Will that remain what could bring about the best life? What if what is currently understood as being the best is seen as a negative in light over time? Would we be burdening our children with unrealistic expectations? So to look at a current example, we could think of what happened in China with the one-child policy. The majority of parents opted to have boys, and now we see millions of young men in China who are unwed, and it seems that what was considered good for the population at that time, the power has sort of now shifted, that women are seen as those who have more potential and more power in the country. So what is considered best at one time may not necessarily be the best over the long haul. But even if one does not support the principle of procreative beneficence, even bringing the question into the discussion of human enhancement can help frame debates about what kinds of enhancements ought to be pursued. If nonmaleficence or negative freedom is the guiding principle, then certain kinds of enhancements will be prioritized over others. However, this may not lead to the results that proponents want, because even something like increasing strength could be argued that you're actually increasing your capacity to harm other people. And increasing intelligence could lead to intentionally confusing or tricking unenhanced people. So most likely, aesthetic enhancements or augmentations would be the only kind of permissible changes in a framework that's bound by non-maleficence, because these would only affect the individuals undergoing the augmentation or enhancement. If, on the other hand, the guiding principle for enhancement is a form of beneficence, then there are other kinds of enhancements that would likely be prioritized. As stated above, people can have it in mind to help and not actually know what would bring about meaningful change. But there are current issues that we face now that could be addressed by enhancements. For example, eliminating debilitating diseases would help individuals and society as a whole. That being said, what is considered a disease needs to have wide acceptance, so that things such as neurodiversity are not chosen against or eliminated due to a negative stigma. Enhancing abilities such as strength, intelligence, etc., could be seen as acceptable in the framework of beneficence under certain conditions, especially if those who have been marginalized or have been lacking in certain abilities receive them first. This also raises the question of who should receive enhancements. If in the negative freedom context, the only restriction seems to be money, whether or not one can afford it. If, however, the idea is to improve society and individuals, then wealth or status may not be the primary ways in which participants are chosen to receive enhancements. It is my argument that in a particular Christian context, the principle of beneficence is a much more compelling framework in which to discuss the nature of enhancements and who should receive them. This aligns with the care for those who do not have a voice in ancient cultures, such as the orphan, the widow, and the alien. And it emphasizes the ministry of Jesus, which was dominated by teaching and healing. Though it does not need to be a complete either-or between non-maleficence and beneficence, because of course loving one's neighbor has to include not doing harm to them. I believe that a body such as the Christian Transhumanists Association can bring concerns to the greater community about these issues, emphasizing the values of the tradition, even while applying them to new and emerging technologies. Thank you.